The wait is over.
It's time for the Do-Over Show with Mike Williams.
Let's all welcome Mr. John, the Citizen Niems.
Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm excited, and I hope you are. We got Mike Williams on, who's one of the preeminent Paul is Dead researchers and has had over 1.6 million views and listens worldwide. We're going to have a great show for you, so get ready.
Way back in '66, I believe Paul died. It was then quite a trick to keep the Beatles alive. Most say William Shepard was his name, a.k.a. Billy Shears. Since Sgt. Pepper, he's had the fame for all these years. John, George, and Ringo, too, were forced to carry on. So with Fall, they put those clues in so many of their songs. So they kept recording because no one noticed the change. And keeping it a secret, then there was no need to explain. Don't fall for Paul. He's not an original Beatle. Don't fall for Paul, because the music business is evil. Don't fall for Paul. That's not who you think he is. No, no. They had to part their ways. It made it easier for them all. The clues kept coming through. They never could forget Paul. Most say William Shepard was his name. So since Sgt. Pepper, he's had the fame. Don't fall for Paul. He's not an original Beatle. Don't fall for Paul, because the music business is evil. Don't fall for Paul. That's not who you think he is. No, no. Don't fall for Paul. He's not an original Beatle. Don't fall for Paul, because the music business is evil. Don't fall for Paul. That's not who you think he is. No, no.
Enjoy the show and have some fun.
Well there, Mike, have you ever had that song leaded you into a Paul is Dead interview?
Yeah.
By the way, folks out there, after watching Mike's great videos, he in many ways forced me to write this song because he didn't know it. But after I was convinced of all the evidence he showed, I figured it was time. So Mike, that song is for you, and because of you, that's why I wrote it. So welcome to the show. I guess we start with your background when you started looking into this conspiracy, as we call these things, but I call it just start doing your research on it. And when did it all start?
Well, I want to start first, John, by saying that I was a huge Beatle fan. And for the longest time, I knew about the Paul is dead rumor, but I just thought it was a marketing ploy. And so in 2016, it was the summer of 2016, I got the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears, and I actually stumbled upon that book. I wasn't looking for it. I was on Amazon, and I was looking for, that was right, that original book right there with the red cover. And so I was looking for Beatles stuff, and the book popped up, and I didn't know anything about the book. I didn't know anything about Tom U. Harriet, and I bought the book. I read the little blurb on it, and I said, let me give it a shot. And so I read it, and when I did, it blew me away. And I wasn't really sure what to make of it at first. And I told Sophia Smallstorm, who's a friend of mine, about the book, and I told her I was reading it, and she had said, hey, Mike, when you're done reading it, you should come on the show and talk about it, do a podcast. And I said, okay. I wasn't really keen on it, John, to be honest with you. I figured all I wanted to do was read the book. The first problem was that it's 666 pages, and if you're going to talk about a book that big, you really have to do some slides and boil it down to something that you could speak to and try to capture all of the important points. And I knew it was going to be a lot of work. The second thing was I didn't want to become the Paul is dead guy, right?
Right.
So I thought that for a while there, Sophia just kind of shelved it. She didn't talk about it. And I thought, okay, maybe she forgot about it. That would be good. But she didn't. And so to make a long story short, I did agree to come on the show and talk about it. And that was back in September of 2016. And I really didn't plan on doing any more shows after that one. I was just going to do that one show about the memoirs of Billy Shears and talk about what the book presents. And then I think it was maybe in November of 2016, Mark Devlin emailed me and he said, hey, would you come on my show and talk about it? And it was on Mark's show, which was the second show, that I had said that this is probably going to be the last podcast I'm going to do on this topic. And obviously that didn't pan out. So it's over 4 years later now, and I'm still looking into it. I'm still talking about it. I think the big piece of the research that I have done over the last 4 years, I think that's pretty much behind me. So I told my subscribers and my listeners what I'm doing now is any kind of news that pops up that I think is noteworthy, right, with regard to Billy and the Beatles and disclosure, that I will jump in and I'll do some presentations and do some podcasts on that type of information. So that's where we're at with it today. And back in April, I released my big presentation, which was, did the Beatles write all of their own music? And that was a 4.5 hour documentary.
Yeah, well, that obviously didn't plan out the way you wanted to, but you become the best, as far as I can tell, the best researcher on it, at least one of the best, and you do such great work, and you never, ever try to criticize anybody else's work, which is great, which is a lot of truth movements, as you know. I've been in all the truth movements. I've been in all of them, basically, and when I start to find something that may be controversial in the truth movement, oh, you can't say that. Well, you got to keep an open mind, and that's what I like about your work. And that's what you were talking about with did the Beatles write their own music? And you started looking into Tavistock, and
right.
I used to say I was a Beatle influence writer, and after your show on the Beatles, I now say I'm a Tavistock influence songwriter, yeah. Which we all are, right?
Yes.
I mean, every one of us is a Tavistock, and we're all Tavistock influence on all the medias, the movies, and everything that's going on right now with this COVID and all that stuff. I was trying not to say that word today, but I had to put it out there, which if people think that's real, I mean, there's no hope for them really at this time, in my mind. So anyway, then you went to then the second book came out, and by the way, folks, they're both 66 chapters and both 666 pages, as William Shepard, or Billy, we like to call him, is a 33-degree Scottish Rite Freemason, but you say he's higher than that now, right?
That's my opinion. Yeah, he's beyond the 33rd degree, so he's in the illuminated degrees now.
Right.
He's part of the Illuminati.
And that's the thing when you start to look at so many conspiracies, like the Freemasons of NASA. You find that there's Freemasons everywhere, and you start to look at their numerology with all the numbers, always 33 coming up. It never ends. It just doesn't end with all that stuff. So talk a little bit then about the when you just did your did the Beatles write their music. Talk about Rubber Soul is like the smoking gun of that part of the video.
Yeah, so what happened was I watched a video, and it's deconstructing the Beatles, and it had to do with Rubber Soul. That's the particular DVD that I bought. Scott Fryman, who was excellent, and he does the presentations, and but he does the official narrative, and so there are other deconstructing Beatle DVDs. I think Sgt. Pepper is one of them, and Revolver, and so on. But I bought Rubber Soul, and it was just on a lark, John. I had no, idea about why I wanted to look at Rubber Soul. I just figured, let me look at that. And I also bought Sgt. Pepper. I haven't watched the Pepper one yet, though. So I started watching the DVD, and I got like 15, 20 minutes into it. And I said, this didn't happen. This absolutely didn't happen. And as a musician, and I know you know this too, there's certain insights that we have when we know that something with regard to the recording process just could not happen the way the story was being told, right? To the layperson who doesn't understand writing music, recording music, and all that, they won't question the official narrative. But as soon as I watched it, and it was set up this way, that the Beatles came into the Rubber Soul sessions, which started on October 11th and concluded on November 11th, so 30 days. They had no backlog of music to speak of.
That's the official story. That's the
official story, right? So they came off their American tour. They had a 6-week layover, and that 6-week layover bridged them to October 11th. Nowhere in the official narrative does it say that the Beatles wrote any music during the tour, which would be virtually impossible when you take a look at the number of tour dates. When you lay it up against the number of days they were on tour, it was basically a tour a day,
right?
A concert a day, I should say. And it was all across the U.S. I think there was one stop in Canada as well. And then when the tour ended, they had a 6-week break. That's how it's explained, a 6-week break. And they came into Rubber Soul with no backlog of material. That's the official story. And then we're told that they had to write 14 brand new songs for Rubber Soul and 2 more songs for a double A-side single, which wound up being Day Tripper and We Can Work It Out. So 16 songs, plus they had to do a Christmas record for the fan club. And I looked at that and I said, okay, so we're being told that they had no songs coming in to speak of. And they wrote, rehearsed, recorded, arranged, mixed 16 songs in 30 days. And it didn't happen. It just didn't happen. And the bigger problem with the whole setup with Rubber Soul is that in order to put an album out, you have to know the run times of the songs so that you can sequence them. And knowing the run times and the sequencing, that's what kicks off getting the slicks for the album covers created, because you're going to have the list of the songs on the back of the album cover.
Right.
And you're also going to have the list, including the sequencing, the proper sequencing, in what order the songs play in. And they had to create the round label for the 33 RPM record, which also included the sequencing of the songs. So when did they do that? In other words, the official story tells us that the Beatles completed 4 songs on the very last day, November 11th. So they did not know, George Martin did not know, based upon the official story, the run times
Or the order.
Right. Or in some cases, maybe even the names of the songs,
Right.
But most importantly, it's the time, it's the sequencing and the run time for the songs. So, in fact, I have a chart here. Let me just read it. And let me just take the audience through this. So the 4 songs that were finished on the very last day were You Won't See Me, Girl, Wait, which they tell us was a carryover from the Help sessions, but they completed it on November 11th, and I'm Looking Through You. So those are the 4 songs that they wrapped up on the very last day of recording. So this creates a big problem with timing. Now, I worked with a team, a small team, and one of the members of the team and another person who was basically an adjunct to the team are very familiar with the pressing of vinyl records back in the day. And it's not just the pressing of the records, but it's the creating of the record sleeves and all that stuff. And if you really expedited things along, it's a six-week process if you really pulled out all of the stops. But in reality, an expedited record release was about 8 weeks back in the day.
Right.
And many times it was a lot longer, right? So the Beatles finished up recording on November 11th. Then George Martin finished the mix on November 15th. And then the mono lacquer was cut, the final mono lacquer, on November 17th. Now, you can't do anything with a record, John, and you know this, until the lacquer is finalized, because that's how you press the records, right?
Right. Well, the timeline, that's the whole thing. And
the timeline does not work. It absolutely doesn't work. So November 17th, they cut the final lacquer, and then we're told that they released the record in stores, in retail on December 3rd in time for Christmas.
That's a little fast.
That's 2.5 weeks, right? So when I started looking at that, I said, okay, well, you know what? There's something up with this timeline. It, as I've said, it does not work. And so I started to dig in to see what was going on. So I just want to give you an example, John, and the audience as well, of the turnaround time of some of these songs. So we're told that the Beatles entered the studio on October 11th. Some sources say October 10th, but I'll use October 11th because most of them say it was the 11th.
Right.
We're told on October 12th, the very next day, they nailed and finished Run for Your Life. So they entered the studio on October 11th, and the very next day wrote, rehearsed, recorded Run for Your Life. Then we're told on day 2, October 13th, they wrapped up Drive My Car. Now remember, they had no material coming into these sessions to speak of. So they're writing from scratch. This is the thing we have to keep in mind. Then we're told on October 16th, 5 days in, they finished Day Tripper. And then on the 18th, If I Needed Someone, that was 7 days into recording. Norwegian Wood was on October 21st. That's 10 days in. And then on October 22nd, they nailed down 2 songs, In My Life and Nowhere Man. And then October 29th, 18 days in, they completed We Can Work It Out. November 3rd, 23 days in was Michelle. On the 4th, it was What Goes On. They finished that. 24 days in. On November 8th, which was 28 days since they walked into the studio, they did Think for Yourself. On November 10th, 30 days, it was The Word. And then, as I mentioned, they nailed down and completed You Won't See Me, Girl, Wait, and I'm Looking Through You, 4 songs on one day, which was November 11th. Now, that kind of schedule, it's not possible. It's just not possible. You know, people think, well, Mike, they were brilliant songwriters and they were gifted and they were this and they were that. I've had people tell me and say, you know, they were writing all the time, Mike. They were writing while they were eating dinner. They were writing while they took a leak, you know, and that's just not the case. It's not the case.
Well, also, you look at their schedule for 65. They were touring, then they did Help, then they were touring, and then they did all this real fast. I mean, it just, when you leading up to Rubber Soul, they had unbelievable schedule, and then they had to take time to just unwind. So none of it makes sense. I mean,
no, and also the other thing with the schedule is that there were days when they weren't even in the studio, so they weren't writing. So as an example, on October 19th, which was 8 days in, there was no recording because they had to do a fan club recording, no recording of the album material. And then there was no recording on October 25th and 26th because they were mixing down, or George Martin was mixing down the 6 finished songs at that time. And also on the 26th, the Beatles received their MBEs. Okay, so we're getting the kind of this scenario now, you know, there no material coming in to speak of. They have to write from scratch. They have to rehearse the songs. They have to record them. They have to be arranged. There are days when they're not even in the studio. It really starts to get very, very strange.
And we know, I was going to mention, we know here in this country, we know the Wrecking Crew was on all the albums that you name a group in America, and most of the music was played by the Wrecking Crew. Now, people who don't know, the Wrecking Crew had Glenn Campbell, it had Hal Blaine, Jim Keltner. The 2 drummers were probably playing on all the albums. Right. Leon Russell, Larry Netchell, I think that's how you pronounce it. He ended up being on Bread, but he played the piano on Bridge Over Troubled Waters. And that's another story, too, about Paul Simon. When he was asked about that song, he said, I don't remember how I wrote it. So right. you start to get suspicious about everybody once you know about the Wrecking Crew. Now, the Wrecking Crew, as far as I know, are they in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame yet? I mean, did they ever put them in? Because they're on every song we ever heard, anywhere. And so what we're leading to is the Beatles, we were always told, played all their songs. We were always told that. We were always said, yeah, the Beatles played all the songs. Well, guess what, boys and girls? They wanted to keep them above everybody basically all the time. And I think that's what we're finding out is their schedule was so rigorous as a Beatlemania goes. And then they're supposed to be writing all this stuff, snapping their fingers, and it's all coming out. So yeah. So, I mean, if I go through the 65 calendar a little bit, so in the beginning of the year, they were playing live gigs to finish up their 1964 Christmas show. So it was a carryover from December of the prior year. And then they were in the Help sessions from February 15th through June 18th. And what overlapped with that was they were also filming the Help movie from February 23rd through April 14th. So they were running in parallel for a good period of time. And then right after they finished up the Help recording sessions, they went on their European tour, which went from June 20th to July 3rd. Then they had a break. I think that was about 6 weeks. Then they went on the U.S. tour, which was August 15th through August 31st of 65. And that was 16 shows in 16 days. So they were just on airplanes and buses and just hauling across the country. And by the way, when they did their concerts, a lot of people don't realize this, John, they were only 30 minutes in length. Yeah. I remember.
Right. They shared the bill with other bands. And then the Beatles had a break from September 2nd through October 10th. And then they went in for the Rubber Soul sessions, October 11th through November 11th. And then right after they finished up, they were back out to get back out on the road because they had a UK tour, which was scheduled from December 3rd through December 12th of 65, and that was 18 shows. So the point you brought up about them always on the run. I mean, they were doing a lot of live gigs. They were in recording sessions. They were filming movies. It's the same thing if we go back and we take a look at 1964 and A Hard Day's Night. It's the same thing. It's this breakneck schedule which left virtually no time to write any music, right? Because aside from all this, people have to remember that they have lives. They have to go do things, real life things. Like they have to eat, they have to sleep. They were young guys. They were going to socialize. They were going to party. And in fact, in my documentary, there was an article that came out. It's in the presentation where John Lennon said that, when they were filming Help, they were in a haze of marijuana.
Right.
Right. That Richard Lester basically had to do what he can to work the filming around whether they were able to stand up based upon how much weed they were smoking. So, and that's not me making this stuff up or, what I did with that presentation. And what's very important, I think, for people to understand is I used mainstream sources for that presentation. And the reason why I did that was because I wanted to show that the truth is hidden in plain sight. And those of us that do alternative research or conspiracy research, we know this. It's always hidden in plain sight. And so when I started digging in and started pulling all these articles up and these different clips, these video clips and these audio clips, the whole thing started to come together. No pun intended.
Yeah, well, also you may want to add here. Remember, the story about Hard Day's Night was written on a matchstick or matchbook, remember? And when you start looking back at the stories of the Beatles, always, the John it was Ringo that said, A Hard Day's Night. And then they said, oh, yeah, and then he wrote the song real quick, and then they had it within minutes. That's the story. That's what we were always kind of told, that they were just instantaneous songwriters. And I've been writing songs for 50 years. I don't know how many years. I'm older than you, so I hope you feel better that you got an older guy here for you. But I've been writing for 50 years, and my song "Made in Heaven" that came out, I actually wrote the music in '94, and I finally recorded it now. And you take time. It's a process, like you say.
Yes.
It's just you don't just go in. And by the way, you want to take a moment to play one of your songs right now to let people hear some song of yours right now? Would that be okay?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't we play? Which one do we got here, Sasha? Soldier of Love. We want to hear that? Let's hear Soldier of Love first.
Well, I can be anybody. sun, and I can be cheap, and I can be the moon, make your eyes see. I'm a soldier of love, the keeper of the light, a soldier of love, the keeper of the light. Yeah.
Best music selection.
Well, there you go. On top of the charts, there's Mike Williams. Now, how many musicians did they have on that one, by the way? Who's playing on it?
It was just me.
Oh, did you do it all? Okay.
Yeah, the only thing is I have a Zoom drum machine, so I just program the drums, and everything else is me. All the vocals, the guitar work, the bass, and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Great guitar work. Sasha, the producer here, is a great guitarist, and he said great guitar work there. And by the way, you're kind of like Billy on the first album there. He played all the instruments back.
Yeah.
So
His McCartney album,
you
yeah.
got the William Shear, yeah. So now going back to your video, one thing that I thought was one of the scenes that I right away, I'm in tune of Freemason stuff, and that was the scene where the guy's playing a piano and asking George Martin, how did John and Paul play? And George puts his hand to his mouth. Tell people about that scene and what George is telling everybody at that time. And George even admits he wrote a lot of the parts to some of the Rubber Soul. In My Life, he wrote the piano part and all that, and the guitar part in Michelle.
Yeah, so it was on George Martin's DVD, produced by George Martin, and he was being interviewed. And the person that was interviewing him is also a musician, arranger, a composer. And he was asking George Martin about certain song structures. Blackbird, I think, Yesterday, maybe it was Eleanor Rigby. I'm trying to remember. It's been a while now. And he was asking George if that was his input into the songs, his influence into the songs, because clearly what was being said was, well, how could four Scousers from Liverpool put that type of structure together, song structure together? And so as he's being asked this question, George Martin does the Masonic silence, and he puts his finger over his lips.
And he left it there the whole time the guy was talking. It wasn't like he put it there for a second. He just left it there, which is...
He left it there. He left it there. And that was
the secret safe. That's what he's saying, right?
Yeah. It's basically, we tell no secrets. And he, like you said, John, he was there the whole time. He kept it there. And what he was saying is, I'm not going to talk about it. Basically, that's what it means. I'm not going to talk about it. And so when I was watching the DVD and I watched that entire interview in that scene and George making the Masonic hand gesture, I thought to myself, okay, all right, so we've got our answer.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's how I looked at it.
And you see Hollywood people doing it all the time. You see so many pictures of so many famous people like that. And it's what they do. They want to keep their secrets. And they're just telling everybody on the top, hey, don't worry, I'm not talking here. That's basically it.
Yeah, and the thing, too, is even if we back up a little bit, in the presentation, I have a slide that has the Mercy Beat article from 1962. And the article was from August, September, and it talks about the Beatles changing drummers, going from Pete Best to Ringo Starr. And then the article toward the end says, and I'll read it here, the Beatles will fly to London to make recordings at EMI Studios. They will be recording numbers that have been specifically written for the group, which they have received from their recording manager, George Martin. Okay, right. So they will be recording numbers that have been specifically written for the group, which they received from George Martin. So that's a smoking gun. That tells you that right out of the chute, when they went into, as an example, to record Please Please Me, that's another crazy album to talk about, where they
yeah.
tell us that the majority of the album was recorded in a single day.
Right. That's the backstories of almost everything. As we get more and more keened into all the lies, you look back and go, "How do we all buy this stuff?" You know, it was shoved right in our face. Look at the Beatles; they can write all their songs; they're the greatest. That's basically what they said right out of the chute, and we're all going, "Yeah."
I just think that, I'll speak for myself. I was just caught up in the music, and I was caught up in the personalities of the Beatles and, the charisma of the band. And so I didn't dig into the narratives. Did they make sense?
Yeah.
And like I said, when I listened to the Rubber Soul DVD, which is the official story, it's the same story that you'll get if you go on to Wikipedia.
Right.
In fact, that's what I did in the presentation. I said, well, here's the narrative that we're given, the official story on the DVD, and here's the official narrative that we're given in Wikipedia, and it's the same thing. So that's the story. That's the story we're given. But, me, like many other people, just about everybody, didn't really put the official story under a microscope, but when you do, a lot of things break down. And I know we'll talk about it a little later, but it's the same thing when we talk about the Beatles going to India and also the Escher demo. Some people might say the Escher demos, which were allegedly written in a single day, or recorded, I should say, in a single day in May of 1968, 27 songs in preparation for the White Album sessions.
Right. There's once again, you start analyzing it and you say, wait a minute, it doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't add up. And, we have Andy White. Now, the official story says that Andy White came in and he drummed on Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You. And my argument has been that I think Andy White drummed on a lot more songs. They just told us about those two. Bernard Purdie, who is a fabulous drummer, session drummer, he played with Aretha Franklin for 25 years. Back in the 1970s, right through the 2000s, and Bernard, he wrote a book, I think he released it in 2014, Let the Drums Speak. Bernard said back in the 1970s during an interview that he drummed on 21 Beatles songs. And Bernard's story never changed.
Right, that's what I was going to say. No one from the Beatle camp ever tried to change him.
No, and he says in the book that he caught, because I read Bernard's book, he has a whole chapter dedicated to the Ringo Starr controversy, and he caught a lot of flack, a lot of hate went his way, and he was teaching drumming, and what he tells us in the book is that the students in the class were saying, Ringo Starr is the greatest drummer, one of the greatest drummers, and Bernard says in the book that it didn't sit well with him because he knew that he drummed on many of those songs. So a lot of songs that these students were pointing to as great drumming, Bernard's sitting there going, yeah, I drummed on those songs.
And that's more believable because this guy was really technically just superior. And another thing that over the years, now I know why John Lennon would give out hints about things.
Yeah.
The most famous hint was the Rolling Stone interview in 1970, I believe it was, when he said point blank, the Beatles were a myth. Yes. And at the time when I heard him say that, being the Beatle fan that I was, like you were, what's he talking about? They're a myth. Now we know what he's talking about. Lennon knows the truth, and he would always periodically throw it out there, and everyone say, well, that's just John being John. No, that was John saying, I want the truth out. I want it out. And now, like the Beatles were the Tavistock. I'll put this book up again. I don't know if I put it up before. The Beatles were the good guys. The Stones were the bad guys. When you think about the British invasion, it was all a planned invasion. And it was after the Kennedy assassination, they wanted everybody to start thinking a certain way. And if you look at what's going on today, if you don't see how much manipulation is going on, the media, the act of 2012, the Smith-Mundt Act that was passed by Obama that said propaganda is now legalized, but in a sense it was legalized all along. But they finally had to make it. Now it's legalized. You can't do anything about it. But that opened the door for what's going on now. But when you look back at how orchestrated everything is and how we are just not very keen to catch it unless we wake up, and then you start looking at one thing after another, and there's certain things, and I won't say which things you can never bring up, you can never question. The great, well, I won't bring up the story again. I got to watch what I say. That's the thing. We live in the USSA right now because we got to watch what we say all the time. Hey, do you want to hear? Do you want to play your other track we're going to play right now?
Sure. And when we come back, maybe we could talk a little bit about Ronnie Verrill and just kind of wrap up the Rubber Soul bit and get to the punchline.
Okay. Okay. Let's play Mike's other song here. What this one's the Moon one, right? What's it called?
Hollow Moon.
This one's called Moon.
I was going to call it Blue Moon, but
Not Elvis.
Hey, if you wrote that one, you wouldn't be here. You'd be collecting the royalties. But.
You are now rocking with the best.
I was walking down this dusty road, a little tired from carrying this load. What is my life really all about? Born with a smile, dying with a shout. I can hear the voices going round and round. There's an old woman standing next to me. She glances up, wanting me to see. Lo and behold, in the middle of the night, an ancient god shining down his light. I can hear the voices going round and round. Beware of the hollow moon. Beware of the hollow moon. You're not me, and I'm not you. It's all a dream, none of it is true. You're not here, you're over there, deep in the stars. We're everywhere. I can hear the voices going round and round. Beware of the hollow moon. Beware of the hollow moon.
We're trying to make it sound like it's a radio play. How's that sound? Hey,
Sounds good.
When did you write the songs that we played so far? When did you write those?
Soldier of Love was written back in 2011 because I released Leaving Dystopia back in 2012, and then I had this long layover where I was writing songs, but they were onesie twosies here and there.
Right.
And so what I had was basically a collage of songs that I said, I can create another album. So the difference was with with leaving Dystopia, it was a concerted effort to sit down and to write the songs for that album. Hollow Moon is really an album that captures, it's a composite of songs that I did, right? So, so I would say Hollow Moon was probably written back in 2016, 17, around there, I would say.
So you didn't do the album in a whole month and release it in a week then, huh? Is that what you're talking
Yeah, no. We should talk a little bit more about that, John.
Yeah, the Rubber Soul. Now, you said you had the punchline for Rubber Soul.
Yeah, so the other thing I wanted to mention is that, so somebody, a contact, a person that has been writing to me for quite a while, came to me, and they are within the inner circle of Ronnie Verrill. Now, Ronnie Verrill was an outstanding session drummer out of the UK. And after I did the Beatles write all their own music, this person wrote me and said, well, Mike, now that the cat is out of the bag, I just want to let you know that Ronnie Verrill, again, within Ronnie's inner circle, I don't want to say what the relationship is because I don't want to give this person, I don't want to make things uncomfortable for them.
Right.
Ronnie said that he drummed on Beatles songs as well. So, we have Andy White, Bernard Purdy, and Ronnie Verrill for sure that were drummers that drummed on Beatles songs. And we're talking from 1962 through 1966, that period of time. And then after 1966, from 67 through 1970, but I guess we could talk about that a little bit later. It was a different approach where the Beatles actually did write some of their own material and did play on some of the recordings, although there were outside songwriters from 67 through 70 and outside musicians, studio musicians that were used also during that time period. But it's my premise that from 1962 through 1966, the Beatles did not play on any of those records, that it was the Wrecking Crew model.
Right.
So they had professional musicians come in, and the Beatles came in to do the vocals. So let me to try to put this into context for everybody. So in my presentation, I had a slide that says how it really worked. So from January through October 10th, when the Beatles were finishing up their Christmas live gigs and then doing the Help movie and all that stuff, all the songs for Rubber Soul were written and arranged by professional songwriters, not by Paul McCartney and John Lennon or George Harrison. Then what happened was all the Rubber Soul instrumental tracks were recorded by session musicians and George Martin, because George Martin was doing the arranging. And we know that, he would also play piano and keyboard. All of the Rubber Soul titles, run times, sequencing, etc., were all completed. So they knew the names of the songs, they knew the lengths of the songs, how much time each song was, and this allowed George Martin to start sequencing how many songs or which songs are going to be on side A of the vinyl, how many songs were going to be in what sequence on side B. So once he had all that, once he had the names of the songs and he had the run times and he had the sequencing, then what they did was they got the album art started. So this is the sleeves, the labels, they were sent out for printing and they were completed. And so what they did was they had the actual Rubber Soul album cover with the songs on the back, and they had
and all the pictures and everything. And
all the pictures. That was all done. So that was sitting, waiting for the vinyl to be completed. Okay, so but what George Martin had already done was he had the songs were all recorded. He had the mix of the instruments already done. So when the Beatles came in on October 11th through November 11th, they were there to sing the vocals and do the harmonies. That was their job. They were there to lay down the vocal tracks. And then what George Martin did after the Beatles finished up on October 11th, now remember, we're told that they finished up 4 songs on the very last day, and it went into the wee hours of October 11th. So the final vocals were mixed down with the previously completed instrumental tracks, which were already mixed, and that took place between November 12th and November 16th, so about a week. So what George Martin did was he had the existing instrumental tracks, he has the vocal tracks that were just completed, and he put them together. That's what he did. The mono lacquer, the final acetate was completed on November 17th. And so from November 17th through December 3rd, the lacquer was cut, the final stampers and the initial run of Rubber Soul was pressed and packaged, and the initial pressings, not all of the pressings, the initial pressings
were sent out.
Were sent out and in time to be in stores by December 3rd. So that's what happened. The other thing that we should also, I should also make mention, there is no date associated with when the Rubber Soul photo shoot took place. It couldn't have taken place after November 11th because that just would have left absolutely no time, right? That just would have complicated things even more. So to me, as I was doing the research, that lent credence to the fact that that photo shoot, because there is no date. If you look high and low, I couldn't find one.
Oh, really?
Somebody can leave a comment. That to me meant that photo shoot was done way beforehand. That was done, earlier in the year. So, which meant the Rubber Soul album was not something that was just a spur of the moment, organic creation by the Beatles.
Right, exactly.
The album sleeve was already created. The songs were already known, the sequencing, the time, and all that stuff. And like I said, October 11th through November 11th, the Beatles sang the vocals. That's it. It's the Monkees. And a lot of people go,
well, that's what Davy Jones said. The Beatles were like the Monkees, and everyone laughed at him. He says, no, they were told to put on suit and ties, and they were. Yes. That's what they were.
Davy Jones said that the Beatles were the first manufactured band. That's a quote, and I had that clip in the presentation in the documentary, John.
Right, I remember.
So, yeah. So the thing is, again, what I want to tell everybody, because there's people out there, they're into the worship and they don't want to let go of their gods, and there are folks that are fabricating, and I'll just say it, they're lying about what my presentation and my documentary includes. And what it includes is mainstream articles, mainstream documentaries, mainstream audio clips, video clips, and so on, that tell us the story. And all I did was I looked everywhere for stories and I pieced them together, right? So it's a little piece here, a little fragment over there, a story that doesn't seem to mean a whole lot over here. But then when you combine them, when you unscatter it and you stitch it together, you get the full story. And that's what happened with Rubber Soul, So we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have the Mercy Beat article from 1962. I mean, that's in black and white. That was printed. I have a copy of it,
right.
And that was in the presentation. And then Rubber Soul is the elephant in the room. In fact, I had people who were in the music business, John, and I can't say who they are, who said to me that there's no way that they can seriously tell the official narrative anymore, Mike, if they're honest, if they're intellectually honest, without dealing with your presentation, with the research that you put forth.
Well, what you did is just you just stopped this whole let's always worship the Beatles bottom line. And there's a parallel with what you did with this. This is one of those things that you just cannot question the Beatles' genius. Right. You cannot question NASA and the round ball. You cannot, there's 9/11's official narrative. You got to just and that's what we're up against right now. There's so many parallels with what's going on right now with this. I don't want to say it again, but this pandemic, there's so many parallels. Common sense is the cure for all of this stuff. If people would just look at the facts and say, well, this doesn't add up. And what official story in our lifetime has ever added up? There aren't anymore. They all are a bunch of lies, every one of them.
It's funny, but they all do fall apart.
Well, they do.
Once under scrutiny.
And that's why they don't want people like us to actually look at the narratives, to look at the timetables, to look at all this stuff. There's a question for you on...
Mike, did the Beatles write any tunes?
Well, do you think the Beatles wrote any tunes? That's the question. That's a good question, I think.
Yes, no, it is a good question. That's why I titled the presentation, Did the Beatles Write All of their own music?
Right.
Okay, so I was very clear about that because I do not believe that the Beatles wrote any of the music between 62 and 66. And what I mean by that, let me just position this correctly.
Right.
It's possible that they may have come in with a basic song.
Some ideas.
But those ideas were handed over to professional songwriters, songsmiths, right? That made sure that these songs were structured properly, verse, chorus, bridge, lyrics, the whole nine yards. So we have to understand this. The Beatles were a massive psychological operation, one of the largest psychological operations in modern times. And we have to get to the point where we understand that the controllers, which we start with Tavistock, and Tavistock tucks in under the Committee of 300, they do not leave anything to chance. They do not. There was no way that George Martin, who was part of this machinery, was going to waste his time trying to work with four guys that before they met him were a club and bar band playing cover tunes. And they weren't even that good a band. Right. And that's not me saying that. I have clips from George Martin himself saying that when he first met them and he listened to their music, he thought it was rubbish. That's George Martin's words. He thought it was rubbish. And he also told Brian Epstein, not interested. And according to the memoirs of Billy Shears, a call came in to George Martin from upstairs and said, okay, look, we know this is not what you want to work with or what you're not used to working with, but you're going to take these guys and you're going to make something of them. Because the Beatles, what they were, like Davy Jones said, they were the first manufactured band. And the reason why they were manufactured is because they were a psychological operation to put forth massive social engineering. And that's what it was all about.
And that's going on all the time.
Right.
We got another question here, Mike.
Well, let me just, I want to answer that other person's question first. We'll get to this one. So I don't think the Beatles really wrote anything between 62 and 66. And starting in 1967, when Billy was fully in charge, I believe Billy was there before 1967. I believe that he, in all likelihood, was contributing to the Help album, to Rubber Soul, and to Revolver. Okay, those are my thoughts. And one of the reasons is because Billy tells us there was an article that came out and said that he wrote the music to In My Life. And then, the media went into damage control because that's supposed to be John Lennon's classic song. Yeah, one
of his best of all time.
Right. And the media came out and they said, well, McCartney just misremembered. And in my presentation, I said, there's no way somebody misremembers writing a song like In My Life.
Right.
It's one of the greatest rock and roll songs. It ranks right up there at the very top of the list on any rock music poll. Rolling Stone, pick one. It's right up there.
And George Martin wrote the piano part to that.
Yes, George Martin played piano on that. And so once Billy was fully in charge, which really was with Sgt. Pepper, that was his baby, he brought them in more to play more on the tracks. He he pressed them to become songwriters, to get better at songwriting. And but even on Pepper, there were mainstream articles that I had in my presentation where they tell us that Billy did the lead guitar work on the title track of Sgt. Pepper. He basically just, didn't use George Harrison's track because George was struggling to get the sound, to get the track down, right? To get the lead down. And in memoirs, Billy tells us he did indeed do that he would go in and he would erase over tracks that the other guys put down because he was looking for perfection. And we have to understand that the Beatles were not studio quality musicians. They were a bar and club band. And when they played live from 1962 to 1966, that's what they did. The Beatles were good at doing cover tunes. And that's what they did for the first 4 years. Basically, it was just an extension of their Hamburg and Cavern days and all that stuff going into 62, into 1966. They were playing songs that were given to them. So I call those cover songs.
And well, if you remember too, when they played, all the screaming was going on. That was good to have the screaming, so you couldn't really hear their musicianship very well. If you think back to that, there was a lot of concerts where people would blame it on the amps. They'd blame the fact they weren't sounding that good on the screams. But bottom line is that was a cover up of what they really were, in my mind. Now that I'm looking at them with real lives, I mean,
yes,
you look at some of the there's a famous concert footage you can find in Japan. And they're singing Nowhere Man, and it really just sounds rotten. I mean, no matter where even with the bad, the mics or whatever, it just didn't sound good at all. And my thinking was, when you start to really analyze it with real eyes, you say, they don't sound that good at all. Well, they weren't that good. And I still love them. I still love their music. And that's one thing you always say. We still like what we hear in this stuff, but the fact is, let's not make them these guys that were these four geniuses. Let's not do that anymore.
Right. So I still love the music. I can appreciate the music regardless of who was playing on the tracks and who wrote the music. It's great music. It taught me how to play and write and all that stuff.
Right.
But so I believe what happened, John, was, just to answer that person's question, because I do want to answer the question. I believe that the Beatles, not Billy, because Billy was always in the equation. He was always writing. I think he goes back to help. But John, George, and we'll just take Ringo out. I mean, he didn't even drum on "Don't Pass Me By." It comes out that Billy actually drummed on that song. So Ringo didn't even drum on a song on the White Album
that he supposedly wrote.
That he supposedly wrote, right. So I believe the White Album is where we start to see the Beatles themselves, specifically John and George, coming out more. And we can hear that's what they sound like. They were not the band from 62 to 66 because those were studio musicians and George Martin was producing the whole thing. But once Billy took over and he was pushing them more to be better musicians and to get into songwriting, we start to hear some of their songs come through. Although, like I said, I believe there were studio musicians that were still being used. To me, if you take a listen to Bungalow Bill, what Beatle played the beginning of Bungalow Bill, the guitar piece there?
No, nobody played that. I mean, it was
exactly.
And then they brought Eric Clapton in for the While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Gently Weeps. And if you listen to the White Album, I don't want to pick on George Harrison because actually I like a lot of George's solo stuff.
Right.
But if you listen to the White Album, we have Long, 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 which I believe George wrote. I think it's a very plodding song. I mean, it's not one of my favorite songs on the album. And then we're to believe that he wrote Piggies?
Right.
That's two different songwriting styles. Two very, very different songwriting styles. So I believe for a song like Piggies, what happened was they went back to the old model, which was George sang the he sang the vocal. But we have a lot of stuff like that, you know. As an example, we have "She's Leaving Home," you know.
And this great string arrangement, that's obviously got George Martin's name all over that one with us.
And it's just John and Billy doing the vocals. Everything else was done by studio musicians and an orchestra. And "Within You, Without You." I mean, give me a break. And they want to tell us that, you know, George wrote the song on guitar. Well, you know, maybe he had some structure of the song. Maybe he brought something in, but clearly, you know, the final version of that song was way beyond his skill set and playing ability.
Well, that's the other thing about you look at the early Beatles to the middle Beatles to the expansion of their music, how it just went, and so you've got to figure there's a lot of different people contributing here.
Mike's fans really
Yeah, I mean, so that's a good point. So when I you take a look at their first album,
people are asking questions.
Oh, we got another question.
We got lots of questions.
We got a lot of questions. We got a lot of questions, Mike. Okay, hold on.
All right, this is from Uyu 99.
Okay.
Mike, were the Beatles an organic band before they were approached by these powerful Freemasons, or do you believe they were recruited from the start?
Do you believe they were recruited from the start, or at the beginning they were a real band? Were they?
Here, just read the question.
Yeah, the guy says, were they an organic band or were they recruited from the start? I think
By the Freemasons.
By the Freemasons. Well, it's Tavistock. Are they the Tavistock Freemason too, right? When you think?
I believe the Beatles were on the radar for a very long time. I believe they were on the radar during Hamburg. You know, there was that kludge of there was Astrid, there was Klaus Vormann.
Yeah.
You know, we have Stuart Sutcliffe. Very early pictures of him making Masonic hand symbols, hand gestures. Now, here's the thing. We have to define what organic means. Like when they were 15 and they were the Quarrymen, were they organic? Okay. I mean, we could sit there and we could debate that till the cows come home, right?
Right.
But as far as them doing all those gigs in Hamburg, all the gigs that they did after that, that was prep. Okay, that was prep for them to gear up, to build up their chops so that they would then take the songs that were written for them, as we are told in the 1962 Mercy Beat article, and take them on the road, right? So they had to practice. They had to get good at learning songs quickly, taking them out on the road, and playing them. But let me just step back a bit here. We have pictures of Paul McCartney and George Harrison with bird cages over their heads.
In the
Bird
early days, yeah, and
is
that means
Illuminati symbolism for mind control. MK Ultra slaves. Okay? Now, some people have said to me, well, maybe they were just joking around, Mike, and they put bird cages on their head. I'm like, I mean, I guess maybe that's a possibility. But if you go and do a search on the internet and you take a look at how many celebrities have bird cages either on their heads, near them, and so on, I don't know. I've got to step back and pause, John, and to the person who asked the question and say that perhaps the Beatles from a very early age were in mind control programs. Because we don't know very much about Paul McCartney's father, Jim McCartney. We really don't. Go on Google and take a look at what you can really find out about Jim McCartney. The same thing with John Lennon's father. Take a look and see what you can figure out about Freddie.
Yeah.
Okay? It's elusive.
And how
really
about McCartney's brother? That guy doesn't even look like Paul. Mike McGear, I think.
McCartney?
Mike McGear.
Yeah, he calls him Mike McGear.
He doesn't even look. He doesn't even look like. I remember he was on a TV show, and they said this was McCartney's brother, and I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't look like his brother. What are you talking about? You know?
Yeah, that's an enigma. That one, right? I mean, look, we've all seen families where maybe the siblings don't look alike, right? So I don't want to say that Mike McGear is not biological Paul's brother, but on the other hand, he really doesn't look like him at all. And also, he's been sitting on this on this secret, on this deception for a very, very long time. Obviously, I mean, he hasn't really said anything to blow the cover. So to go back to the question about were they ever organic, I'm going to say no. I don't believe the Beatles were really ever organic. I suspect that at least McCartney and John Lennon were in mind control programs at an early age, and one thing led to another. Clearly, by the time they got to Hamburg and they were playing, they were on Tavistock's radar. What I believe Tavistock does is they had a bunch of bands that they were keeping an eye on. Because they were always looking for a pipeline.
Rolling Stones, The Who. I mean, the Stones were the bad guys at the beginning, right from the get-go.
Exactly. They were looking. They need that pipeline of resource to come forth, and the Beatles were tapped to be the first manufactured band, as Davy Jones said. Okay, so I hope I answered their question. It's a little choppy because we have to define what organic means. I mean,
exactly.
But again, my answer is that from a very, very early period, their late teens.
And then, well, look at today's music, and you look at all the artists, and I remember, like Taylor Swift and all that. I don't believe they write any of their songs. They always tell us they're the songwriters. They're so manufactured, all of them.
No, I have folks that reached out to me, John, who are professional songwriters, and they told me that the crediting of music to artists that they didn't write happens all the time.
Yeah. Well, we know it more and more now. Yeah.
It happens all the time. So this is not something that's unique to the Beatles. That many of these artists that have their names where they're credited as being the writer of the songs, the composer.
Well, I met Smokey Robinson. I was playing a party here in 2003. And I said, so you wrote over 4,000 songs. That's the story. But do you believe Smokey wrote over 4,000 songs?
No.
I mean, and it's, I figure I've written hundreds. And I know, by the way, folks, if you're watching, every one of my songs I've written, I can vouch for that, okay? So
Another question for Mike.
Oh, we got another question for Mike.
Yeah, go ahead.
What is it?
How much of today's band/music are following the same model the Beatles have?
Yeah, well, that's what we were just saying. How many of today's music is following the same model as the Beatles? I would think probably all of them, basically. Wouldn't you think? The famous ones.
Yeah. So this is my theory, right? So back in the '60s and '70s, they were all following that model, right? That's what the Wrecking Crew was all about. We may have had some exceptions. As an example, John, just stepping back, you mentioned Paul Simon when he wrote "Bridge Over Troubled Water," right? In that interview, I think you might have sent it to me.
Yeah. Well, the first thing Paul Simon said was, "I don't remember how I wrote it." That's the first thing.
It's the same thing that Dylan said, right? Dylan said that in the interview with Ed Bradley.
Yeah, he doesn't remember. Yeah.
Right? He says, "I don't know how that stuff came to me. It was like it came from outside of me." But also, Paul Simon had said that it took them 4 days to make sure they got the piano part down in "Bridge Over Troubled Water," where they felt that was it. 4 days just for the piano part on "Bridge Over Troubled Water." And we're to believe the Beatles cranked out 16 songs in 30 days. We have to start putting this stuff into context and into perspective. Now, today, I believe in the 60s and 70s, it was the Wrecking Crew model. And then what happened was these professional studio musicians, they then became part of the bands themselves.
Yeah, like Larry Netchell, who played the piano on the Bridge Over Troubled Waters. He went on and played with Bread.
Right, that's what happened. So we had a transition from being this unit of studio musicians that were called in to play on this album, that album. I mean, if you listen to the Wrecking Crew documentary, by the way, folks, it's on YouTube. You can watch it. It's fantastic. These guys will tell you that, they were going from gig to gig, recording studio to recording studio, sometimes 3 or 4 in a day. They were just, recording these songs.
And they were all hits. All the songs you hear that are hits, they were playing on it.
Absolutely. The Beach Boys, Pet Sounds, that was the Wrecking Crew. Everybody thinks the Beach Boys laid down the music for that album. They did not. It was the Wrecking Crew. And so after we got through the 70s, then, from that point forward to this day, you've got these studio quality musicians as part of the band. And if you watch, there's another great documentary, folks. Watch Hired Gun. It's either on Netflix or Amazon. Hired Gun. And watch that. It's 2 hours. It's eye-opening. Joe Perry didn't play on some of the Aerosmith tracks. It's mind-boggling, when you start to listen to these stories. These guys are finally coming out and saying, hey, look, I played on that track. That was me. Everybody thinks it's Joe Perry, but it wasn't. It was me, So it's very, very interesting. It would be okay, John, if they just told us the truth out of the chute, out of the gates.
Well, isn't that about everything, I think?
Instead of just, if they lied, that's what they do. They lied about it. They built this entire Cinderella story for most of these bands. And that's the Beatles. The Beatles are, the story, the official story is myth. It's a Cinderella story. We're to believe that 4 working class Scousers from New York were discovered by a small record store owner. You mean
Liverpool? You mean Liverpool, not New York?
I'm sorry, Liverpool. Yeah, I'm from New York.
Yeah.
From Liverpool, and then got them connected into George Martin at EMI. And EMI, by the way, is tied into the deep state. It always has been.
Right.
So, and then it went on to incredible fame and fortune. And look, it didn't happen. The story is completely, it's fiction. It's a fictional account.
And the Beach Boys are a parallel, because when you look at Dennis Wilson could barely play the drums, so all the drumming was probably Hal Blaine. And if you look at early Beach Boys live performances, they were just not very good when it was just the Beach Boys playing. But then as they started getting better, they'd always have other musicians to play. If you notice, when they started touring in the 70s, they always had like 5, 6, 7 more guys, because they needed those guys. Same thing with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Stills and Young could play, but Nash and Crosby could barely play. If they didn't have Stills, who could every band you can cite example after example that the official story of every band is pretty much like the Beatles in many, many ways once you see with real eyes, And going back to, do we have another question on there?
I just want to say Stephen Stills, he parallels Billy's kind of life as well. I was watching a documentary on Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and they were talking about Stephen Stills and being a perfectionist. And boy, I'll tell you, when they were talking about him, it was just taking me back to what Billy was telling us about his training.
Right.
In memoirs. I just figured I'd throw that out there.
Right. Well, Steve, and all Stephen Stills with Laurel Canyon, all the musicians that came from military intelligence. Stephen Stills' dad was Frank Zappa's dad was Jim Morrison's dad was the commander of the Gulf of Tonkin ship and the famous George Stephen Morrison. And Morrison is another. I'll say this real quick. He was another guy that didn't want anything to do with music, and then all of a sudden he wrote these great lyrics and songs out of nowhere. And I think the first song that Rob Krieger wrote was "Light My Fire." That was the very first song he wrote. Now, I don't know if he wrote it now. It's like the backstories are always a little far-fetched, I think. But anyway, now let's see.
There was another question?
Yeah, but I was going to say I wanted to talk too a little bit. I had a question for you again. Well, go on to when the Beatles became solo artists. That's a question I have, because a lot of the albums you can see it's more of them. There's a lot of film of Lennon when he did the Imagine album, and you have all those guys coming in. And I think by then, when you think about it, they were probably, after playing as many years, they were starting to write their stuff, and they were all, getting to be pretty good after all those years. When you think when you see the filming of that and George's first album, and you start to see that they were getting better by then, I would say, when they got solo.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing we have to we have to acknowledge is that the Beatles could play their instruments, right? I mean, they weren't studio quality musicians going back to 62 and 66, and they were playing more on the records based upon my research from 67 to 70. But by the time they got to their solo period, yeah, I believe that they were writing a lot of their own stuff. They were playing on their records. Clearly, George was a very good slide guitar player. We can see that when we watch How Do You Sleep, and he's playing the slide,
Right.
In that documentary. So, but the thing is, what we should do, John, is we should listen to their solo material and then step back to the 62, 66 time period and say, did the guy that wrote John Lennon, right?
Right.
Did he write, is that the same guy that wrote In My Life?
Right.
Or Norwegian Wood?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
John's solo material, even though there's a lot of stuff that I do enjoy, I love his first solo album. It's very raw. I love Working Class Hero. I love the song God. His Imagine album, Crippled Inside and stuff like that. Some really good songs. But I'm sorry, but it's not the same songwriting, and it's not the same quality of songwriting
right.
that we heard back then, And I think people need to pause for a second and do that comparison.
Well, and compare all the songs from all the years that they were together, and that's what a lot of people, they say. Well, John, when he was on a solo, he liked to just have it simple and all that. Well, he didn't have George Martin there with him, and he did.
Right.
And they had Ringo on the first, I think the first album. But if you listen to the drumming on that, it's all simple, real simple stuff, And
it's not even that good. I mean, I don't want to beat up on Ringo, but if you listen to his fills at the end of the song God, they're not crisp. Okay?
Right.
That's not the same guy that did the drumming on Day Tripper.
And flash forward to him traveling with all these great musicians in the Ringo All-Star Band. Now, he can play with them, but he's got all these fabulous musicians playing with him. So it makes
a second drummer.
And I was just going to say, and always has a second drummer. So it's always there. Hey, look at Ringo. He can play. Well, now he's on live, and that was the best movie ever made. Of course, did he make it? I think they probably said, Ringo, here's what we need you to do now. Start putting together an all-star band, start showing all these famous people as great musicians kind of thing, playing all the songs. So then, again, it's part of the story. And he's still doing it at 80. I think he's still...
Yeah. He's a great entertainer. I've seen Ringo like 5 times over the years.
I have too.
Hey, he's a great entertainer. So, I don't want people to think I'm beating up on the Beatles. It's not that at all. What it is it's taking a look at what the truth is versus what the fiction is, And Ringo, Jim Keltner played on some of Ringo's albums.
Right. I tuned the piano for his.
What was Jim doing on his albums?
I tuned the piano
drumming.
I tuned the piano for Keltner's sister last year, by the way. And
did you? Okay.
Yeah, and I told her, hey, tell Jim I'm a big fan, man. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. I wanted to play If Lennon Were Here, since we're talking about Lennon now.
Yeah.
We're going to bring up now before we play If Lennon Were Here, I want to say that if I wrote it today with All I Know More, it wouldn't be so, making John this guy that knows everything. But I still love the guy. But this is the song I wrote as a tribute to him.
You are now rocking with the best.
If Lennon were here, he'd see things so clear. He'd know what to do, and he'd inspire you. He'd see through their lies, the terror disguise. He'd know what is hoax. He'd know how to coax you. If Lennon were here, he'd lead with no fear. He'd know that Iraq is just another Vietnam. He'd be at his best, singing songs down. If Lennon were here, imagine if Lennon were here. He was coming out to sing again and shout, but this time all his truth would be heard by different youth. Mind-controlled MK, it's the CIA. I would like to bet they still viewed him a threat. If Lennon were here, he'd see it so clear. He'd know all wars are money ventures. He'd be at his best singing songs of protest, and he'd be our own lie detector. But Lennon, they feared he had to disappear so their lives could still be manufactured. Imagine if Lennon were here. Imagine.
Now, when there's a lot of talk that one of the reasons Lennon was assassinated, and by the way, I leave open all assassinations and all stories if they really are, but that's another story, maybe another day, because there's a lot of suspicion on. But one of the things I remember people saying recently was the fact that one of they called the album Double Fantasy because double. The talk was that John was going to come out and say, "Yeah, Paul did die." Did you ever hear that?
Well, that actually originated in an interview with Dr. John Coleman. Coleman wrote the book, The Conspirators' Hierarchy, The Committee of 300, and I think the 5th edition came out in 1985 or so. So, I mean, the book is around, maybe it's 25, 30 years old now. But in an interview that he did, I guess after that, he had said that Lennon was going to come out and write a book, and it was going to be a tell-all about what the Beatles were really all about. And we also probably should talk about, Mal Evans, who was killed, who had a manuscript that contained a lot of very sensitive information as well.
Shot by the L.A. police. They said he was going to shoot them. And
right.
Yeah.
John was probably the most prolific as far as the Beatles as coming out and dropping clues, John. That's my opinion. You mentioned the Rolling Stone article, but he not only called the Beatles a myth, he said McCartney was a myth, he said Dylan was a myth. In the Playboy interview, he said that Paul McCartney, Billy, was a multi-instrumentalist. These are all clues that he was dropping. And he also said in the Rolling Stone magazine, I believe it was the Rolling Stone magazine, going back to the early 70s, that the Beatles were craftsmen.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right? He said they were craftsmen. And he said by the time they came to America, he says they were old hands. So, what he was telling us was that the Beatles were primed and brought along to play the role that they played. And a craftsman also has connotations going back to Freemasonry.
Right.
All of the Beatles were Freemasons. And there's plenty of proof of that. All we need to do is take a look at some of the pictures and images. If we do a search, and you could see that, we could see the Eye of Ra, the Eye of Horus, Masonic handshakes, the lion's paw. We could see all kinds of Masonic symbolism taking place. I mean, their second album, which is with the Beatles, it's all one-eyed symbolism, right? Half the face is blacked out.
Right. That's pretty obvious there. Now it's way obvious, but when we saw it, we didn't have any idea.
I didn't think anything of it either. But, now when you take a look back, you could see it. And the Beatles were immersed in the occult. And I'm not saying the Beatles themselves were occultists, but the people that were managing them, the people that were steering them, the people that were running the psychological operation, that's probably the best way to say it, they were occultists.
Well,
And
remember how John said he came up with the Beatles name too? How he made it into it was a dream, and they would say, "You are the
Yeah.
Beatles." I mean, the whole thing, and he's having fun with it because he knows, hey, this is a part of the story. And one thing I wanted to mention was the assassination. I don't know if people realize that Jose Perdomo was the doorman who was a CIA operative from the Bay of Pigs, and that didn't come out till like 8 years afterwards. But in actuality, he was the only witness.
yeah,
And he told Mark David Chapman to leave. And before he did that, though, he said, "Do you know what you did?" And it's a trance. You can see, now I mentioned in the song the CIA, but going back over my notes, the FBI could have been the main people behind it. But there's many parallels with the Reagan assassination attempt and the Lennon assassination. John Hinckley Sr. was a businessman, a business associate with George Herbert Walker Bush. He
Right.
ran the World Vision camps, and that's where Mark David Chapman was a few summers before, as well as the YMCA, which is where the CIA gets their mind-controlled people. And Yoko didn't even see it. She was way ahead of it. And you have to say, again, I don't think Yoko had anything to do with it, but I leave question marks in the sense who stands to gain from this. If he did die, again, you saw the movie last year, yesterday. Now, why
Yeah.
would they have that scene? If they're trying to tell us something. Why would they have that scene where he goes on that shoreline to a house where John Lennon at 78 meets him? Why would you have that scene if that wasn't the case?
Yeah, it was very interesting. Also, John, back during the double fantasy period, I identified 3 different John Lennons.
Oh, yeah. There are different ones.
There are different John Lennons. So we have the one that has the very pinched nose down here. We have one that has a very beaked nose.
Right.
And then is a third that has a very straight nose,
That's the first John Lennon with the straight nose. It was the late John Lennon had to get yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's very weird. It's very clear to me because what I did was I put a collage together, and I put these different versions of Lennon up there, and you can see that there are different iterations of John Lennon. So my personal belief is that the original John was still around. He was paging in and out, but there was a second John that was introduced during the Sgt. Pepper period. This was the skinny, lanky John Lennon, right?
Right. And
the original John,
for the movie
people
that
don't
he
realize.
was in. The movie, he was a skinny guy, right?
Yeah, the second guy, who came out, I think, around the 67 timeframe with Pepper, he was very skinny, very thin. And best I can tell, and it's very difficult to do this, folks, because they're always doctoring stuff. They're always, futzing with the images and stuff. But I think they were both in play but the 67 version took a more prominent role going forward.
Yeah. Well, some people think it was all the Beatles are Fall, Fun, Forge, and Fingo.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I do say I'm open to it. Listen, at this point in time in my life, I'm open to anything, man. I look at everything, and I always tell people that think, people either love me or hate me. There's no in between. I'll just tell you that. They either love me or hate me. And the ones that hate me just won't look at anything, bottom line.
No.
But the bottom line is the more research you do, I live by these words, the more I know how little I know. I really don't feel I know anything half the time. But I know more than the people wearing the mask today, I'll tell you that.
Well, I tell people the mask is a litmus test for the IQ of the human race.
Right, it is.
So,
it is.
It is. I mean, the truth community used to be out there saying there was this great awakening. And actually, the best thing that came out of this whole CV thing is that we can actually see that tagline that there was this great awakening is false. It's not true.
Exactly.
The number of people who are actually awake is a very small sliver of the population, right? Because I'll tell you, when my lady and I go out, we just cannot believe how many people are wearing these masks. And we're into month 7 now, John. 7 months of these people wearing masks, and they're cutting, off their oxygen. They have hypercapnia, headaches, fatigue, mouth sores, rashes, sour breath, all this stuff. And they, even with all of those symptoms that many people are suffering because they're wearing these masks all the time, they still cannot figure it out. They still can't figure it out.
And even when you tell them, and I show them, I have all kinds of stuff to tell them, they'll have the mask on, and I'll say, look, this is what you're doing here. And they look at you, they look at it, and nothing. It's like there's nothing coming out. I mean, I say, I almost want to say, can you read my lips? Because I can't read your lips because they're covered, but can you read my lips? This is a hoax, a 100%. And and that, the only two things that our media talk about right now are this COVID hoax and the election hoax.
Yeah.
That's it. And I don't know. I wanted to play my election year song too because.
Yeah, play it.
You got it also. Well, I wrote that. By the way, my new song "Made in Heaven" I wrote in '94, and then slowly I go through I got stacks and stacks of lyrics, and then I find it. Now this one, the election song, was another one I wrote in the '80s, but it was a different way. But I take it and I say, yeah, this will be my election song. So this is called "Isn't It Funny?" Election 2020.
You are now rocking with the best.
Isn't it funny how every 4 years they expect us all to vote? And isn't it funny how you'd think it would be clear that all our elections are a joke? You'd think by now people would be wise. It's a dog and pony show, as both the parties lie. The candidates are selected. Make no mistake, no one's elected. As young people, it would have been easier to have known the truth way back when. And it's sad to say, but until everyone's awakened, sorry folks, but it won't end. Isn't it funny? Our life seems to fly. Before you know it, you're old. And isn't it funny how they never stop their lives? And you wonder why so few want to be told.
This is the best classic sound.
Yeah, so few don't want to know the truth. That's why I ended it that way. So few don't want to be told. You tell them the truth, and you give them the facts, and they still want to watch the mainstream lie news. And I ask people all the time, I say, do you trust the government? And most people will say, no, I don't trust the government. But you trust them during this COVID-19? Are you out of your minds? Jeez. I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing. Anyway, I don't know. Listen, I'm enjoying this like crazy, Mike. I tell you, this is a lot more fun than last week. I'll say that.
Well, you keep going, John. Whatever
Yeah.
you wanna talk about.
Anything you want to add to the Beatles solo years, or anything you want to add to the COVID-19 or the election, or any topic, man? You know, I know you had a great video that I saw, a small one, showing the what was it, from another country that showed what they want to do with the vaccine and the
Ireland.
It was Ireland. Yeah. I mean, that was, I watched that. Oh, I can't wait to get that, you know? It's like, who wants to line up for these vaccines, man? It's like ridiculous. Of course, my brother's wife does. I know that. So,
Well, that's the technocracy, right? So that's what they're trying to put in place. And what I did a video going back, I think it was March, and I had said that it was a psychological operation, and of course, people would want to know, how do you know that? And so what I did was I ran the numerology on coronavirus, and it came out to 11. And then when I ran the numerology on COVID-19, it was 9. So we have 9/11.
oh, yeah.
And so, right, so it becomes a 9/11 event, and that's what I call them. And 9/11 events mean that they're going to put in place major transformational change. They're looking to fundamentally change the society and the culture. And so I ran the numerology again on Black Lives Matter and BLM, and guess what? 9/11. And then I told folks we have the trifecta, which is the first presidential debate between Trump and Biden took place on September 29th. The 29th regroups to 2 plus 9, 11, 9/11.
Right. Yeah.
And I said, okay. I said, so here you go. So you have 3 major events that took place this year, all encoded with 9/11, which means you better, buckle up, put your helmet on, because it's going to be a very, very rough ride.
Well, how about the death of the original James Paul McCartney was 9/11, 1966.
Yes.
That's what most people say. And how about the events here in Vegas? The shooting was Harvest 9/1 on 10/01. It comes out to 9/11 right there.
Yes.
And on top of that, I don't know if you know, the windows were 9 windows apart, the broken ones. And by the way, I always, they didn't explain that. There's supposed to be one shooter, and they got 2 windows that are broken apart. What is it? He's breaking this one, he's going on this. But the windows were 11 floors down from the top as well. So it doesn't end with that. But when I saw Harvest 91, I immediately know, wait a minute, Harvest 91. And then I was looking, it's on 10/01. I said, there you go. And when you know what you're looking for, it's so obvious. I mean, the numbers, and also the number 33. NASA, when they come back from their fake shuttle missions, they land on runway 33. The coal miners that were saved in Chile were 33 of them. OJ was sentenced to 33 years and fined $33 million, and he got out after 9 years. I mean, it's like,
right.
You see that? And it either means one or two things, people, if you're watching. It either means it's totally fake, or it means it's totally fake. Or it's totally scripted. I mean, I should say. It's
scripted, yeah. It's staged to happen. It's orchestrated. So I always tell folks, does that mean nobody died? I said, I never say nobody died because I wasn't there.
Right.
But what I will say is when those numbers come up, we know that they put that event in play.
Right.
Right. And so they put that event in play in order to move the agenda forward. So the numbers they love are 3, 6, you'll see 7, 9, 11, and 33. And, they paint by the numbers. And I actually did a video on that recently to try to explain to folks that, once you see this and once you know this, once you can even have a basic level of decoding, you actually have less fear, John, because
I know that, yeah.
It's by not knowing that stuff, there's more fear because you don't understand. once you understand, the fear goes away. You may not like what's going down. I don't like what's going down, but I don't fear it. I understand it.
Well, that's how they've been controlling people forever. The fear frequency. That's the number one frequency to control everyone. And as you were talking, I was thinking of other 33s. People, Kennedy was shot on the 33rd parallel. The buildings were built in 1968. 33 years later, they brought them down. Also, in 1968 was the first year that the 911 emergency call thing went through.
That's right.
And you start to look at it, and then you go, yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence. Do you?
No. Kennedy was shot on November 22nd.
Yeah, 11/22.
22 is 33.
Right. So, I mean,
Right?
and Lennon was actually it was 12/9 in England when they supposedly shot. But one of the things, going back to the Lennon assassination, I remember vividly reading one of the doctors when they brought Lennon in. He said, "That's not John Lennon." That was his first words. So, again, was it really him or wasn't it?
Right.
And then why would they have that movie yesterday showing Lennon at 78? Remember, he asked him, "How old are you?" And I'm 78, and then he gives him a hug. It's like, wait a minute, did you really die? I mean, what other reason would they put that in the movie? In my mind,
there was a lot of Paul is dead clues in that movie.
Yeah, talk about a few of those in that movie.
Well, just the whole thing where the basic premise that this guy has an accident, right? Right, and there's an accident, and he winds up in this basically this parallel world where he becomes famous by writing songs that already existed, right? So if we take the model we just talked about,
right,
Tavistock writing the songs, right?
Yeah.
And then them playing the songs that were written for them and becoming famous for it, right? So there's a lot of stuff like that. There's also a clue that they drop in the movie where they mention Ginger Geezer, which is Vivian Stanshall.
Yeah, and he's another guy that
Well, Billy played in the Bonzos. He played in the Bonzos with Neil Innes as Vivian Stanshall, and one of the songs that's associated with Vivian Stanshall is Ginger Geezer. And so, what's that guy's name? Ed Sheeran. It was in the kitchen scene where Ed Sheeran actually dropped the clue, and he mentioned the name Ginger Geezer. So that was another clue for those that are really, really paying attention to this conspiracy, the McCartney conspiracy in particular. Billy played in the Bonzos with Neil Innes, and they were two Vivian Stanshalls. People always say to me, Mike, how could there be Vivian Stanshall and McCartney at the same time? Well, that's because there were two Vivian Stanshalls. Billy played the original in the Bonzos, but then he hired an actor musician to put on his payroll to play Vivian Stanshall when he was out doing his McCartney gig.
You know what that reminded me of? Andy Kaufman, when he did that other character that he was the lounge singer that was a total obnoxious lounge singer, and then he had his agent play him too, and people couldn't tell that wasn't Andy Kaufman.
Yeah,
there's an example there. What was the guy's name? That was the most obnoxious character in the history of entertainment, by the way. And and Kaufman loved doing that.
Yeah,
just like he loved doing the pro wrestling side. And you had that pro wrestler that you talked to, the former pro Russo is his name.
Oh, Vince Russo. He actually was the creative writer for Vince McMahon.
Oh, so he's the guy then that was fighting with Andy when those fake fights they had?
No,
he started the world wrestling thing. That's right.
Yeah, Vince was the lead creative writer for Vince McMahon. And so he was actually writing the scenarios. He was writing the scripts that the wrestlers would follow. That's what Vince's job was.
Well, one of the things I tell people, to me today, pro wrestling is more real than any other sport. More real than baseball, or it's come to that. I mean, at least they tell us it's fake. But I said 4 months ago, I said and I don't know why I didn't put any money down, but I said the Lakers are going to win it. They're going to win it. There's no doubt in my mind. Why didn't I bet? I don't know, but it's so easy to predict sports anymore. And you know, if you look at Michael Jordan, he had 6 rings, he had 3, then I think he had a betting problem or whatever. But they're all Freemasons in the sports.
Yes.
And then he had 3 more. 3.
Right.
It's scripted all the time.
Well, that's what George Carlin said. You know, it's a big club and we're not in it, you know. And that's the big fallacy that's thrown out there to the public, which says, hey, if you really work hard, you know, you can make it, you could be very successful. Well, that's true to a point, but there's a ceiling, you see. So if you think in terms of a pyramid, there is that glass ceiling. And if you're not in the club, if you're not in that inner circle,
right,
then you'll reach a certain point, and that's as far as you're going to go, no matter how much talent you have. And those that are in the club, those that are all connected by bloodlines and their secret societies, they go above that ceiling. I mean, it doesn't matter whether they have less talent than the guy that's sitting below the ceiling. That's the way it is, you know. And it's just how it works. And they tell folks, you could be a great musician, you can have a great band, you can make a lot of money and all this stuff. You can, but here's the thing too.
You got to take an oath.
You got to take an oath. You're going to sign contracts, and you're going to wind up being told what to do. Your creative license is going to be taken away because you become an asset of theirs. You're a tool of theirs to push an agenda forward, because the music industry and the entertainment business, John, as you know, is completely controlled. Cradle to grave. It's controlled, you know, and people don't like to hear those things. And all of these people that you worship, all of these celebrities and these musicians and these artists and these bands, you know, I don't know. We've got to get away from idol worship.
Exactly. My thinking is the best thing that ever happened to me, and maybe it was for a reason, because I have 35 plus truth songs now. I could never write these songs if I was a famous guy. I never could write these songs. So I look at it, my job today is to do what I'm doing. I got a song, Made in Heaven, which, hey, we got an immune system. Apparently we don't have an immune system anymore. You know, everybody's so afraid. Everybody is so afraid of dying, they forgot how to live. And that's what that song's basically about. I'm saying, hey, there's no reason to be afraid of a virus that's not contagious and it's not airborne. Well, if you do your research, here's what I tell people all the time. People that don't wear masks are adults because we research. People that are wearing masks are children still. And if you make your child wear the mask, that's child abuse. That's no other way to look at it. And so that's what I'm about. I'm doing truth songs all the time. I've got a video. By the way, Mike, all my guests that I bring on, I have a song for them that I wrote. Next week, I have Dave Gahary coming on. He's about the USS Liberty. I have a song. Okay. I have a song for that. I have a song for David Weiss coming on, Space Farce.
Well, that won't be going on YouTube.
What
USS Liberty.
Well, actually,
you can talk
funny.
Around it.
No, but my video of that hasn't been taken down. But I want to say too. Mike's Sage of Quay, anybody listening here, you should go watch his videos. I guarantee all of them are very, very worth watching, educational. Mike's a great guy. I hope you see that right now. That's why I'm a big fan of his. And David Weiss is going to be on. He had a website called Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole way back when, and I have a song called Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole. So when he comes on, I will play his song. I have Dave Gahary coming on. I have June 8th, 1967, going to play for him. He helped me write it in the sense that when I told him I'd write him a song, he gave me all the facts about the USS Liberty. And next week, folks, if you want to know all the history about it, Dave will come on and tell you all about it. And we all ought to know it. Let's think if everyone knew that the Israelis attacked our ship on June 8th, 1967, that would be big news, but they've hidden it from, again, they hide all the things they want to hide that are important. And I always tell people, if you think I'm a nut job, if you hate my guts, then why are they censoring everything I do? All my 12 CDs are censored, all 12. I won't tell you why. One song did it all. Number 6 on number 12, by the way. But that's who I am. And now I have a BitChute. Now you have a BitChute link too as well?
Yeah. So the best thing to do is to go to my hub website, which is sageofquay, QUAY.com, sageofquay.com. And all of my links to all of my platforms are there. And also, John, I want to add, because I know a lot of your audience are geocentrists, flat earthers.
Well,
So I'm going to be at the Flattoberfest next Saturday, October 24th, in Greenville, South Carolina.
oh,
And I'm
okay,
going
that's
to be
where
doing a
David Weiss.
presentation
That's
there.
where David Weiss was going. Then he told me he was going to South Carolina. That's why.
Oh, David's going there too. I didn't know he was going to be there.
Well,
Okay, so it's going to be a very big crowd.
Yeah.
Karen had told me, well, not told me, but she had put a video out and said as of about a week ago, she's had over 200 tickets sold. So I think there's probably going to be about 300 people at the conference. And it's not just about flat Earth. It's really a meeting of like minds.
Well, that's like the
Right.
COVID. You're going to want to talk about that. You're going to want to talk about all these hoaxes
Right.
that are going on.
Yeah. And my presentation is going to touch a little bit on geocentrism, but then we're going to get into what this reality is all about. So, so if anybody can make it down there, you have to go to the website. It's flattoberfest.com, and you have to buy a ticket. So take a look and see if it's affordable. And if you can come down, we'd love to see you.
Well, you brought up Sophia Smallstorm earlier, okay?
Yeah.
She was instrumental in getting you really starting to be in the Paul McCartney, right? I mean,
That was the first show.
Right. Okay. Well, she was the one who got David Weiss to look at flat Earth. And David Weiss, to me, is like the premier flat earther right now. I mean, he can explain it better than anybody. He's going to be on my show in probably 2 weeks. So
Yeah, I'm glad because David's he's a good spokesperson for that area of research.
exactly.
Others, I mean, let's put it this way. I'm glad David is the front man.
Right. And then I got Shelley Lewis, who's doing the documentary. She's going to come on. And so, I'm trying to, folks, the reason I'm back doing these live shows, they took my live shows down right away. One they took down in midstream. Of course, they may have done it last week for all we know. But hey, I'm a piano tuner. I'm not the enemy here. I'm a piano tuner. I've tuned 23,000 plus pianos. I've written hundreds of songs. All I want is goodness. And my Made in Heaven song, which I'm proud of, basically covers the two topics. I never say the CV word, but I'm pretty much, the germ theory was debunked many, many moons ago. In fact, Louis Pasteur on his deathbed said, "Hey, I made it up." Why don't they say that when they're alive, right? Anyway, if you want to go to Sage of Quay. Mike, this has been a pleasure for me talking with you today. We want to have you on again. We'll talk about
Anytime, John.
We'll talk about other stuff. I think we'll go out. I think we should go out with my Made in Heaven song because we all are. This is a beautiful place to live. There's no reason to fear coronavirus. We all have a cold. When you have a cold, by the way, do you wear a mask when you have a cold?
Right. Live your life, folks. Live your life.
So now Made in Heaven is coming on, and thanks for coming on, Mike. It's a pleasure, man.
You're very welcome, John.
You have a good day, buddy.
You too.
Our blue earth was made in heaven. We're all blessed from the start. Right from birth, we're lucky to be living with Jesus' love in our hearts. The air we breathe was made in heaven. Vitamin D from the sun. Food with nutrition, with water we are living. Our immune system is second to none. Our bodies are made to fight off disease. Now that should be very clear. Toxic medicines and poison vaccines. It's time for the germ theory to get out of here.
Get out of here.
Bye-bye, germ theory. off disease. Now that should be very clear. Toxic medicines and poison vaccines. It's time for the germ theory to get out of here. All things good are made in heaven. We've been blessed from the start. I'm thankful that my music is sending. Hear me now.